Give it another minute. I usually wait till. Well, they changed that one.
Okay, should I start?
Well, let yourself be introduced.
Good morning, everyone, in person and virtual alike. Welcome to Grand Rounds. My name is Dana Williams. I'm a pediatric gastroenterology here, as most of you know me. And I am delighted to present our guest speaker for Grand Rounds today, Dr. Harris Baden from Seattle Children's. I just wanted to start by saying that several years ago, a couple of leaders from our hospital were charged to think about the strategy that we should be following in patient experience. And we all sat down around the table and we did not even quite know how to start that conversation. And a couple of years after that, we engaged with other leaders around the country in a pediatric experience collaborative, and realizing that there is so much more to be determined, to learn about patient experience, and mainly and to develop the pediatric experience field. There's a lot more history to that, but that's how Dr. Baden becomes a mentor, and he is here today from Seattle Children's to open our series of Grand Rounds on patient and team experiences in pediatrics. So Dr. Baden is a professor of pediatrics and served as chief of pediatric critical care unit at the University of Washington and Seattle Children's for greater than 2 decades. He is still in the CVICU, but he really spends a lot of time leading the patient experience and family relations at Seattle Children's. Harris also is the co-founder and former chair of Pediatric Experience Collaborative, and he is here today to discuss just that. What do we need to focus on and know as physicians? Dr. Baden.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. Can you all hear me? Yeah, this microphone is working. So, yeah, it's green. Know if I'm heard out in the internal. Not, I can just use this microphone. So thanks for that introduction. So I'm particularly happy to see the residents here today. I want to talk a little bit about, or a lot of it, about why it's important to focus on the healthcare experience. And so I will hopefully help you understand what we mean beyond the obvious when we say the healthcare experience, what it is, why it matters, and what we can do to try to optimize that experience. And I think it's important to set the context. Healthcare has changed a lot in my career, and it has become more and more highly specialized, as you all are well aware. And the experience can feel fragmented for patients and families and for clinicians. It's complicated, it's opaque. You don't sort of understand, if you're not inside the healthcare world, who to talk to, where to go, who are the right connections. And so it's tough to navigate. For families and for patients, it can feel overwhelming, daunting, and certainly frustrating. And what I would say is that it's not a comforting experience. And that's honestly true, I think, also for those of us who are practicing in healthcare. The experience has become more and more challenging to navigate. And I assume that many of you have had the situation now in your life where people in your family are reaching out to you saying, what should we do about X? And how do we get this person or that person to see us or whatever? And when I think about the efforts that I make on behalf of my family and friends, and then think about those who don't have those connections, it's particularly poignant. We had the good fortune, Dr. Williams and I and others at the Pediatric Experience Collaborative last week uh, to visit St. Jude Cancer Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. And it was a phenomenal experience for us as we learned about how they use human-centered design concepts and even have a human-centered design vice president to help them understand how to create experiences that meet the needs of patients and families, but also of their teams and their staff. And their CEO spoke to us in a very inspiring and also very compelling way, Dr. Downing. And what he said is that children and their families should not leave with unnecessary scars. And what he was referring to is perhaps it's too strong a word, but perhaps it isn't, the emotional harm that we can inflict upon patients and families when our systems are not compassionate, when our interactions are not compassionate, when they are in a crisis and concerned about their child's welfare, and yet they are now having to navigate this foreign land. So I'm going to tell a quick story. I am a pediatric cardiac critical care specialist. I take care of kids who are critically ill with heart disease. And I admitted a baby to our intensive care unit. Logan was his name, many years ago now. And Logan has hypoplastic left heart syndrome. And he was admitted in the middle of the night, as they always seem to come in the middle of the night. And we got him settled. And I turned to his father after getting him settled into the room. And I asked him the two questions I always ask. One is, what questions do you have? And the second is there anything that I can do for you? And his response was, just promise me that you will bring your best self every day. And that's a really, to me, it encapsulates the work that I'm doing and the work that we're doing in partnership with other hospitals like yours. And that sort of begs two things. It begs the question of, well, why would a father say, just promise me to bring your best self, you'll bring your best self every day? From his perspective, I think it tells us how he's feeling, right? That he's entrusting us with the care of his most, precious thing. And he can't be the dad that he wants to be to his baby, holding him like this father on the left. And rather, he finds himself in an environment like the one on the right. So that, on a certain level, is almost obvious why he would want that. But it also begs a question of me and of us, which is, what is my best self? What do I need in order to be my best self for my patients and families? And even to ask for someone who's been in it a long time like me, what have I lost along the way that used to be a motivator, that used to be my priority or my North Star? And what have I replaced it with? And in particular, what I'm thinking of are, what are the tasks that overwhelm me and turn my day into a series of tasks instead of being present to what it is that I'm doing, which is honestly a very sacred work, to be involved and intimately involved with families who are in situations like this. So experience really, I think, is summarized by this little slide, and you'll see this now throughout the rest of the presentation. And this comes from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, IHI, and they launched this program several years ago, and it was as simple as this: what matters to you? And what they did was they encouraged us as clinicians, as leaders, to talk to our teams and to talk to our patients and to talk to their families and to talk to our communities and really try to understand what genuinely does matter to you. And that summarizes in many ways the work that I'm doing and the work that Dr. Williams is doing and the work that we're all trying to understand. And that is to understand the experience through the lens of the patient and their families, in pediatrics in particular, to understand it from the perspective of clinicians and staff, and to understand it from the position of an organization like this one. And the framework that I use for that discussion is the value equation, right? And basically what I would submit, and hopefully you all know this equation or it's intuitive. I guess you don't have to know this because you're in the Fichte equation you should know. And if you need to go over that, I'll go over that. Value is just benefit over cost, right? And so the conversation is, what are the benefits to the patient, the family, the providers, and the hospital? And what are the costs? And how do we maximize this equation? So I offer this just for conversation. If we were doing this in a more interactive way, I would ask you, what is the value equation for a patient and their family? Well, it's having access to care, it being timely, They're looking for guidance and support, and ultimately they're looking for the best outcome. And the conversation about outcome is one that we could go on for a long, have for a long time. But I let them define through this conversation what that outcome is. Certainly, they want their child to be healed if possible, but the best outcome. I didn't say that, I didn't say that they were going to be cured, because for many of our patients, that's not quote unquote possible to be cured, but it is possible for us to achieve the best possible outcome for their circumstance. And then in the denominator, we have complexity. So the more complicated the system is, the more it inflicts that emotional harm, that stress of, you went to your 2-week pediatrician visit and they said they heard a murmur and we want you to go see the cardiologist at Phoenix Children's. From that moment forward, every interaction that we have with them is either helping or hurting the stress that they're feeling, okay? So it's not just about diagnosing, getting that echocardiogram and understanding what the finding is, but it's about the entire journey that family is on. Any inconveniences would be and then errors in care, right? Untoward outcome. For clinicians, and I would love to have this conversation with all of you, but instead I summarize from the many physicians and clinicians and students that I've spoken to through the years. Clinicians value purpose. You came into this work because you sought to fulfill a particular meaning for you. They want to practice their craft. They want some autonomy over the work that they're doing that respects their expertise. They ultimately want fulfillment, and then they want compensation, and not just compensation in terms of monetary, but in terms of non-monetary things like the reward that you get from being in service to others, and also the prestige and the hopefully still some degree of prestige and the respect that you get, the assumption from those that you meet that you are someone who has some expertise. If you want to understand further what that includes in the conversation, then I would encourage you to look into the concept of the social contract and that exists between physicians and society. It's a fascinating reading. And then on the denominator side, there are the burdens and the inefficiencies of the work that we do. And by burden, I don't just mean the tasks that you have to do, but also that we see hard things and we do hard things. And it's a privilege and it's an honor to be in those positions, but it can take a toll. We bear witness to a lot. The inefficient systems and the time that we have to put into our work. And again, the stress and strain, both physical and emotional, that this work can take. And for an organization, the value equation is more on the lines of achieving whatever its mission is, quality care, safety, equity, and then margin. They want to be solvent and competitive in their market so that they can continue to serve their community. And then again, inefficiencies, turnover. So when you leave as a clinician within an organization, the cost is tremendous to that organization. And then liability exposure, which is a reality. So what I would submit is that everything in all of those equations relies upon us. It all comes down to people, and what our experience is informs the operations of the organization, ultimately the finances of the organization and outcomes. All of the value metrics rely upon or are dependent to the experience that we have as clinicians and others on the front line. And in, excuse me, I get very emotional with this slide. And in turn, patients and families. I have a t-shirt that I bought from The Onion that says, "Stand back, I think I know CPR." I would never wear that in the ICU, but it's great for, heart center picking. So this is an important slide, and it reminds me to say to all of you, and I hope I don't have to, but in particular to administrators who are thinking about what do we want to focus on in our work. Focusing on experience is not a smile camp, okay? This is not a would be nice to have. I'm not looking to have families, give feedback that says they're happy to find out that their child has, neuroblastoma. What it is it's a campaign to understand how do we be most supportive to them in their moment of need, and how do we as organizations and as colleagues support each other so that we can be the person that we would want to be if we were being portrayed in a movie about caring for a kid with neuroblastoma, right? And there are times that that just doesn't happen. And we can't be that person. And often it is the systems, the experiences that we have that undermine our ability to be who we want to be, or even deprogram us in a way that we think our priorities are different than what we really want to be if we reflect on what it is that we're dealing with in interacting with a patient. Often we lose sight of that. This is not a smile campaign. This is not a would be nice to have. The other thing that I would say is that for people like Dr. Williams and me who are working in organizations and trying to advocate for this perspective in organizations is we do ourselves a disservice when we allow experience to be in a different lane than safety and quality and outcomes and whatever it may be. Because again, experience is all of those things and relies upon all of those things. The quality of the care that you are able to deliver relies upon or is dependent upon the experience that you're having as a clinician on any particular. So we shouldn't allow it to be sort of pushed off into a corner and you'll get whatever's left over in terms of resources and attention, and you'll be the first thing to be cut when resources and attention are at a limit. Rather, I would say we need to be foundational in all the domains that an organization thinks about. And so ultimately, our core business is we are humans taking care of humans, right? And so as an organization, these are a variety of different articles that talk about, that sort of make the business case much more probably articulately than I can in this setting or at all, to say that this is work that must be at the core of everything that we do. And this is a sort of the seminal book. It was written now probably close to 10 years ago. It's called Compassionomics, and it sort of translates compassion into the financials. And what it says is that this book provides evidence that one simple tool, compassion, can affect not only the outcomes for our patients, but also the financial health of an organization and the well-being of our providers. So that's our call to action, okay? So if we then turn and use the construct of value-based care, which is thinking about what actually brings value to patients, and ultimately, for almost 2 decades now, has been sort of the ideal that we've been striving for to determine reimbursement and so forth on care. If you think of it in terms of value-based care, this is again the concept of refocusing on patient-centered outcomes for quality improvement in healthcare. And what it requires 2 things of us. It requires that we understand what our patients need and what they want, right? And it then requires that we align that with our clinician and our organizational. So if we look to the social sciences, there is the concept of stereotypic content modeling. And essentially what stereotypic content modeling does is it looks at behaviors and relationships between people. And what they the summary is to say that when you meet another person and you make an assessment of them in the first however many minutes, you are assessing 2 things: their competence. Are they who they say they are? Can they be what they purport to be? And then their warmth. And it turns out, based on the research done, not by any of these 3 authors, but by an author named Susan Fisk a professor named Susan Fisk at Princeton, that those same principles apply to when we look at a product on the market. Is it what it purports to be? And what qualities does it have under the warmth domain that I can identify? And so this is the concept of bringing competence and warmth to our assessment of healthcare. So competence is the transactional things that we do in healthcare, right? It is the systems that we have for access and scheduling and flow and parking and so forth. And it is the processes that we have. It's the things it's the what we do every day in order to deliver care for our patients. That's competence, and that's the transactional. Warmth is more the relational, right? It is What do we convey to patients and families in our behaviors, in our actions, in our systems? Are our systems designed to accommodate patients and families, or do we ask our patients and families to accommodate our systems? Again, those are the types of things that we convey that impact the systems and the structures and the experience that we as providers have in our patients and families. But when we're interacting in our systems or as individuals with our patients and families, what do we convey to them? Are they seen? Do we really see them? Do we understand what they value? Do we respect them? Do we treat them with dignity? And importantly, do they get the sense that we have their best interests in mind? That's a really important, and if you do the logistic regression analysis, if you could apply it to qualitative research, that always is sort of at the core of how a provider is rated by a patient and family and how an organization is rated by a patient. It is not whether you picked the right antibiotic. It is whether you convey to them that I see you, I get it, and I care. That's what makes the difference to them. And then how do we do it? Well, it's our actions, it's our behaviors, and it's our words. So when it works on the transactional side, the competence side, from the patient's perspective, it's easy to access our system. There's clarity around what happens next. It's predictable and it's reliable. They can depend upon it. As clinicians, it's easy to do the right thing. And unfortunately, I bet you can attest to the fact that in many cases, it's not easy to do the right thing. So that's a heavy lift in looking at our systems to say, how do we make the right thing to do? It's making sure that we have the resources, and it's making sure that the work experience that we have is sustainable, right? We don't want to burn you out, to use a term that's very common, but we don't want to burn you out in 5 years of being out of your residency or in 3 years of being in a residency, right? We want this experience to be sustainable for you so that you can serve others into the future and so that you can get the reward that you deserve in terms of the experience when you're wrapping up your career like I am looking back on. It's not the art lines that I got on a first stick. It's the experiences that patients and families and with my team. And then from an organizational standpoint, it's efficiency and effectiveness. Systems work well, the organization prospers. And then when the relational aspects of the interactions work well, patients feel compassion, they feel trust, and we're going to talk a little bit more about trust because that is critical to any outcome, to any experience. And then it impacts the outcomes. For clinicians, it gets back to the reward that we have in recognizing in the moment that this is a special moment for me, and I'm feeling fulfilled in what I'm able to achieve for this family or this patient or for this colleague. It's the impact that we can have. And then again, for an organization, it's the efficiencies, the effectiveness, the reputation, and the culture that you're able to foster. So investing in the bottom line, the value case for improving human experiences. This is just a slide that I pulled out of there, and it just summarizes what I said, which is it's about the patient and family and the care partner values. It's about what the community values, the organization values, and it's about what we value. And the impact it is manifested in these ways within an organization. It improves workforce engagement, which is really about how well does an organization create an environment where you feel seen and valued and where you feel empowered, and therefore you can bring your best self to work. It impacts workforce safety and well-being of the teammates and all these different ways, clinical outcomes, quality and safety that we talked about, all the way down to boosting our external rating. And boosting our external ratings, we can look at in sort of two ways. We can look at it in, I don't care about that stuff, I'm here to take. But what we have to understand is that that is a part of the warmth aspect of the reputation that you have as an organization, the reputation that you have as a provider, not only impacts the quality of the care that you deliver, but it impacts the feeling of the care that you deliver to patients and families. And that's what brings. So these are all value adds. Now, what is the experience of clinicians in healthcare right now? You've probably all heard the references, even before COVID, to the burnout in healthcare, right? And to the feeling that of not feeling connected in your work because the systems that with which you engage, and it used to be the number 1, 2, and 3 on that list was the electronic medical record, are undermining your ability to deliver the care that you want to patients. And the consequences of that can be devastating for you, and it can be devastating for the patients when errors occur or when missed opportunities occur to deliver quality care because you're not healthy in your role. So there are a lot of initiatives that are happening at a variety of different levels, trying to understand how we improve the experience of care clinicians and how we mitigate burnout or eliminate burnout. And what I would say is that, like patient experience, we're learning. And so 5 years ago, when we were heading into COVID and there was a recognition of this epidemic of burnout in healthcare, there was a lot of focus on what do we do to create work-life balance? What do we do to, to give you guys swag and ice cream cones and so on and so forth? And then what do we do to encourage you to go, do yoga or mindfulness or whatever it may be, so that you can tolerate the experience of care that you then are encountering in your daily work. And what we really want is an environment where we recognize that when clinicians thrive, our patients thrive, and our organizations. And this is a slide that is to say that all the efforts that we make to improve the experience of care that are focused on resiliency and your well-being and mindfulness and yoga, those are all great things, but those are not the solutions. Our work is not to make you more tolerant to a toxic, more resilient to a toxic environment. Our work is to change the environment. So an organization that offers you the chance to exercise or to eat healthy or so forth, or to sleep on campus or whatever, that's wonderful. And I encourage it, and yoga or whatever it may be, but that can't be the only solution. Part of the message that sends to you is that it's your problem, right? You have to fix it. And that further contributes to this idea within burnout that you're not able to do what you need to do. The problem is not ours. The problem is the systems in which we are working. And that's not to throw the systems under the bus. It is to say that we have to acknowledge that so that we can then evolve in a way that does optimize our experience so that we can be present to our patients. And so ultimately, the patient experience and the staff experience are about human connection. And those are the keys that we have to focus on in order to drive success. So if we look at the different elements on the value equation for an organization and for patients, when you superimpose the feedback that we get from clinicians about the environment, the culture of an organization, and then you run it against patient safety, you'll find that there's a lot of alignment. When the culture is healthy, there's psychological safety. We will speak up without fear of retribution. We will communicate in ways that ensures better safety for our patients and families, and we will be healthier, and therefore our patients will have safer outcomes. The same thing is true as if we look at patient satisfaction. I told you that certainly in the adult literature, the single most important determinant of how a patient rates a clinician in the setting is whether that clinician conveyed to them that I see you, I care about you, I have your best interests in mind. It's not necessarily about getting the right antibiotic, but I would also submit that you're more likely to get the right antibiotic when the patient is feeling comfortable enough to share with you what it is that is their primary concern and what it is that is the functional implications of their distress. Service recovery. How do we as an organization, or how do you as a clinician, address situations that are going in, at least in perception from the patient and family, in the wrong direction? It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to lean in and not defend, but to be curious, to try to understand, to be empathetic and say, I know I did the right operation, or I know that your whatever is going to happen next in your care is the right thing, but something is missing for you. And so this is an opportunity for you to demonstrate in a transactional way that either we have to change what we're doing because I've missed something and I'm listening to the alarm that you're sending off, or in a relational way in demonstrating that no, I understand that how I have informed and communicated you about next steps is not achieving what I want, which is for you to be comforted in knowing that I'm looking out for your best interest. So it's the difference between caring for a patient and caring about them. Okay. So when you want to try to care about them, it's again not about making them smile at you. It's about satisfying their needs. It's about listening to understand and learn, not to convince, right? So often you'll see the interaction where I'll say, someone will say like, oh, I want to start you on, whatever, Cepha something. And the family says, oh, we don't want to be on Cepha. That's my keyword because I don't remember all the antibiotics anymore. I just let the fellows do it. Put them on Cepha something. And the family will say, I don't want to be on that medication. And then you'll say, well, all the literature says that's the right medication for whatever, but I don't want him to get that. Well, I'm a professor and I have been doing this for 20 years and it's the right job. Instead of asking, what is it about Cepha something that you're worried about, right? And that immediately takes you off from being sort of defensive and meeting their emotion with facts and rather addressing their emotion. Just tell me and it may be that they say, my friend's kid got Cepha something and they ended up with a brain tumor. Okay. So you can quickly dispel any concerns that they may have, but at a minimum, you can address them, you can be aware of them, and you can then narrate your interactions going further with a recognition that this is something that this mom or this dad or this child is worried about. And I want to be attuned to that and attentive to. So medical liability is probably not something that you all think about, but an organization does, especially as premiums are climbing for healthcare organizations. But it's also an opportunity for us to learn. So this is Jerry Hickson. Jerry Hickson is a dean at Vanderbilt, and he's a pediatrician. And he spent his whole career trying to understand, why do patients sue doctors and why do they? And basically what he's found is that patients don't sue doctors that they like. So if they feel a connection to you as a person, they won't sue you. And patients sue for errors in diagnosis, but not for errors in treatment. So let's explore that a little bit. What does that mean? My doctor cares about me is about being seen and heard, and it's about connection, and it's about trust, right? And trust is something that when you walk into a room with your child and it's a baby and they've got some erythema around their umbilicus or whatever, as a mom, you were told, like if this happens, bring your child back in. You're concerned, right? You're in a state of vulnerability so who is this person that's taking care of my child? Who is this person when I walked in the room that's now responsible for looking after my child? And what are you conveying to them, right? So how can you quickly establish some degree of trust so that they will speak their truth so that you can address what is their genuine concern, as opposed to just reading off the sheet that says umbilical, erythema. And it's just from a diaper, fold or whatever, but the mom is worried because some other baby that she knew of had whatever, ectodermal. And so how can you be attuned to what it is that they're really concerned and be present to it, even if it is minor? And then the concept that they will sue for errors in diagnosis, but not for errors in treatment. But what do we learn in medical school? We learn that 90% of the diagnosis is in the history, right? It's in, did you ever really listen to me? And when I kept telling you that my knee hurt and you kept saying you need to go see a physical therapist because you had, closure in terms of what you were thinking, I know what this is, instead of listening to what was really happening for them, patients feel that. How often do you feel that? Or does your family say that to you? Like, oh, I went to see the whoever, but he didn't, he or she didn't really help me because they kept thinking it was this, that, or the other. That's a missed opportunity to deliver the right care to the patient, but it's also a vulnerability. You never got the diagnosis right, okay? As opposed to treatment, if you get the treatment wrong, but you got the diagnosis right, that also tells us something. That tells us that you did listen to me. My doctor did listen to me. The therapy didn't work, but they did understand me. They cared about me, and they're less inclined to sue you. And this is not so you're practicing to not be sued. This is looking at this in a way that to an organization matters, and to us, it's informative. Okay. Error disclosure. Should we do it? I'm the medical director for patient and family relations and risk management in Seattle. And I'm not in the cardiac ICU. I am talking to family. And those conversations are a lot harder than the ICU. And what I've learned in that is that when you disclose an error, when something has happened, or when you acknowledge that something has not gone the way it should, or when you just embrace the idea that their perception is that it hasn't gone the way that it should, you start to rebuild relationship. And it feels scary, and it feels like a failure, right? I don't want to walk into this room and say that I put the endotracheal tube in the esophagus. That's pretty devastating. But I put the whatever art line in, or the femoral vein line into the femoral artery, and now we have to start heparin and get ultrasound, so forth, because it compromises for myself who I think I am. Right? I'm a master of my work, and I care about these kids and so forth. It's hard to do, but I in my experience, it's what our patients and families want and need, and it brings closure to me. If I just leave it there in my mind and fret about it and never sort of address it in that way, and I don't ever get closure around it, those things build up. So should we? Yes, we should. And should we say we're sorry? Yes, you can say you're sorry. You can say, I'm sorry that this is what happened. You can't, you don't have to walk in and say, I'm sorry I made a mistake if you didn't make a mistake. You're not acknowledging a mistake, but you can say, I'm sorry that that was your experience. I regret that this went the way that it did in a way that undermines your confidence and trust in me or in our organization, or added to the stress and strain of your child. Those emotional responses to the emotions that families are having are much better than fact responses. Those always go. When 90% of these calls that I have with families, the clinician involved is on the call. Right? And these are typically complaints and grievances, not egregious, medication errors. But I always tell the provider, don't meet their emotions with facts. Just acknowledge that it was hard for them as a patient and as a parent, and you wish it had gone differently, or you wish that you had communicated differently so that you didn't add to their stress. And then for those patients and families, the dynamic changes, and not just does it change in a positive direction, it avoids it changing in a negative direction. When you get defensive, families get more and more frustrated. They're not being heard. So speak your truth, speak honestly, regret the experience, commit to communicating better, and commit to trying to understand what happened if it was an error, so that you can improve and that you will, as an organization, improve. But don't be afraid to have these conversations. They're very meaningful. They also encourage an environment where there's a culture of reporting, and so safety improves. It's the ethical, moral, and fiduciary responsibility of us as healthcare organizations to share these things. And it decreases your medical liability. There are numbers of papers, particularly out of Michigan, in their experience in rolling out their CANTOR program. Oh, I'm 9 minutes over, but I started at 7. That show that if you disclose, and if you do so in a way that is compassionate, and if you do so in a way that you don't defend or speculate, it's always dangerous when families say, but what if? I always tell the providers, don't speculate. Don't say, well, that's possible, or that may not be possible, because that's a straw man conversation. But it decreases the likelihood that your organization will then face, or that you will. And then with our focus appropriately nowadays on understanding, recognizing, acknowledging the disparities that exist in outcomes for folks based on things that should not be relevant to their clinical outcome. When we are attuned in this way to who people are, what their environment is, then we can eliminate those disparities. And it requires a commitment, and it requires honesty within ourselves to recognize that is implicit bias a factor in how I'm responding to this patient, and also just to recognize what triggers you may have. we walk into based on your lived experience relative to their lived experience, and acknowledge that both are valid, but they should be considered, but they shouldn't be determinants. We have to be attuned to them and aware of them and present to the impact that they can have. But then with that awareness, we have to have an intention when we enter the room. We have to stick to that intention and recognize that anything that deviates us from that is taking us off course. We need to measure in an organization the impact that the realities of health disparities, and we need to make it visible within our organization. We have done this at Seattle Children's. We acknowledged 3 years ago that we had disparities in our outcomes at Seattle Children's. If you were in my cardiac ICU and you were Black, you had a 3.5 times greater chance of getting CLABSI, right? How is that possible? So the first step is to recognize and acknowledge it. And the second step is to then say, we're going to make this visible to all, and we're going to do the work to understand what the impact is, what the experience is in terms of delivery of care, so that we can mitigate we can eliminate these disparities. And I can now say in front of you that we have eliminated these disparities. In 3 short years at Seattle Children's, there is no delta now in any of the metrics for quality and safety related to any attributes other than the child. That was a big step for us. And but it started with recognizing, acknowledging so many conversations about how is that even possible? I don't care what color the child is. I don't care what you care, Dr. Baden. The data are the data, and you can't explain them away. So, what are you communicating? I love this quote from Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that, in a lot of ways, summarizes the work that we're trying to do. I know that you all are smart. I know that you're all A students. I know that we could together in unison recite the Krebs citric acid cycle, right? Should we do that? No. Okay. But your patients and families are in a vulnerable situation. And if you can convey to them in the first minutes when they walk into a room that you're present to them and that you care about them, then they're much more likely to listen, to share what they're experiencing, and they're much more likely to enact a plan, follow through on the plan that you create with them. So what are you communicating? What are you communicating in your actions, in your behaviors, and in your words? Now, here's another thing that I encounter a lot when I talk to teams is that they think that it's grand gestures that make all the difference. I can't, bring a cupcake in for every patient. I can't this, that, or the other. Reality is it's not that. It's the smallest gesture. It is one empathetic word. Even if it's just to say like, right? When they share an experience that is their reality and you acknowledge it, it's incredibly powerful, right? So it is the smallest gesture, the touch, if appropriate, a smile, if appropriate, a frown, if appropriate, or just right? One of the people that teaches some of the work that I do with others always says, it's okay to tell them that sucks if it sucks, right? That is an acknowledgement that what they're experiencing matters and that you're present. See it and you hear it and you value it. So it is small gestures that make all the difference. Don't let sort of the feeling that you have to boil the ocean, it's not. It is just in the moment. And it applies to your colleagues. It applies to the nurse who's working with you. It applies to the MA who just roomed the patient. When you, as the physician, invite their participation, it's incredibly powerful. When you acknowledge them in a way that says, I see that John roomed you today. He's one of our best MAs, and that whatever. That validates him in a way that will bring return to you as a clinician and ultimately to the patients and families. Your role as a physician, even if you don't think you're, I'm not a leader, I'm just here to, write the right prescription. By virtue of your role, you are a leader. Every clinical team, and the tone and the environment that you create determines the whole outcome for everyone else. So embrace that in a way, in a positive way, which is to invite an environment that is inclusive, that invites the participation of others. So this is back to that article when we looked at when they looked at the critical role of competence and warmth in patient-provider interaction. And again, it's about behaviors that are associated with competence. It's about behaviors that are associated with warmth, right? But the important thing in this is it's the behaviors that bridge the two. So much of the things that happen over in the transactional side are improved when the relational side is augmented. When you really see and hear and listen with curiosity and empathy to a patient and their family, you're more likely to deliver safe, high quality, efficient care. We did a study with one of our electrophysiologists, pediatric electrophysiologist, and it was about time, because a lot of pushback that I get from providers is I don't have time to do all. And the reality is that this improves your efficiency. It shortens your interactions with patients and families on the whole. When with Jack Salerno, our electrophysiologist, we studied him in clinic, and he did his typical approach, which was, a kid has an abnormal EKG or whatever, and they would come in and he would start by explaining the heart. He would start, and then he would tell them all about, the electrical activity of the heart and the SA node and the AV node and the Purkinje fibers and so on and so forth. What happens, and so therefore that turns into an EKG, and on the EKG, we're able to show, and that might tell us that either you have an electrical problem or you have ischemia or whatever it may be, or you have a thick side of your heart or whatever. And he used to go through that whole thing talking to families because he thought he was educating them about. And instead, when you using a different approach, which is to really try to identify what their concerns are from the very beginning, which for the family and for the child is probably a lot more to do with, am I going to drop dead on the soccer field or am I not? Than it is about understanding, all what an EKG is and what it all means and so forth. When Jack was able to identify that concern at the very beginning, his appointments became much shorter because he didn't have to go through that whole discussion of the electrical activity of the heart and so forth, and what the history and the data and so on and so forth tells. He could understand that we have an abnormal EKG from a screen at your pediatrician's office or at your school, and you're worried about, can you still play soccer? And I can tell you that you can still play soccer, and that's it, right? So the notion that being present to those human interactions with patients, those niceties, if you want to use a pejorative to mine, somehow is going to lengthen your interactions and add to your burden is 180 degrees the opposite of reality. So this is my cute way of saying it's not just the transactional, it's not just the words. If you sent this text to your partner and asked, okay, if I got a happy hour before coming home and you got this response, would you go? No? Oh no, right? I mean, it's an answer. So it's a trap. There's a guy who, okay. Yeah. So what happened to evolve our understanding of what we're conveying? Emojis, right? You get an emoji that says sure, and it looks like that, you darn sure better be on your way home, right? As opposed to one that looks like that. So the point is that the emotion that you convey to that you demonstrate, or the actions and the words and how you deliver them really matter to patients and families, and to colleagues, right? To nurses who are working in your hospital, and they call you about this, that, or the other. How you interact with them. There's the transaction of yes or no, and then there is the how you say it, what it conveys to them in terms of how you value them, and how you respect them and their dignity. And again, listen, my kids say, what? You talk about communication, right? To them, it's preposterous. but it works. It's real, and it has an impact, and you can also use it with your spouse. Be curious, understand, try to understand. So, what is the impact of compassionate communication? Hopefully, it's the first step to establishing trust. From the minute the patient walks into your clinic, you say, Phoenix Suns, I love the Phoenix Suns, right? Because of the t-shirt that they're wearing or whatever. That little thing does a lot to say, I'm here, I see you. You're not just the next kid on my list who has a sore throat. You're a little, 6-year-old who's in the first grade and likes to do whatever little first graders like to do nowadays and so forth. That matters to the little kid, and it matters a lot to patients. When you look at the comments that come back, so often they'll say, oh, the pediatrician addressed my child, was present to the child. Families notice that. They want you to see them. So trust, which then creates a safe environment for them to share, right? Which again is true of your colleagues. When you do something that earns their trust or quickly tries to establish some trust, they feel safer to share with you. They're more likely to be candid, more likely to get to the right diagnosis. You're more likely to get to. So the progression is intuitive to all of us, but we aren't typically thinking about this when we walk into. I know that when I show up in the cardiac ICU in the morning, we're going to make rounds. We're going to huddle, and then we're going to walk around with the surgeons at 8 o'clock. And then we're going to make work rounds, and that's going to go to 11 o'clock. And I have to dictate a note or type in a note now on all of my patients in the cardiac ICU. And I want to try to do some teaching when we're on rounds. And then after we finish rounds, we have to quickly do whatever it is that we're going to do before kids start coming out of the OR, the surgical cases and so forth. And it's very easy for that, in my mind, to be all about the tasks that are in front, right? I have to check off all these tasks. The problem with that is you miss an opportunity to be present to the reality of whatever it is that your team is experiencing, right? Whether it's talking to a family, how hard it is, child has, whatever it may be, or how hard it is to be a nurse and be in a patient's room for 12 hours nonstop with a kid who is critically ill with really complicated physiology and bleeding and all the different things, and then their moms and dads. That is an incredible burden, right? If you can be present to that and just say, thanks for being in there today, that's incredibly powerful, right? But it's easy to just get caught up in the work that we have to do, right? And then when we're all caught up in all those tasks and the busyness and so forth, along the way, a kid codes and dies, right? So now it's a series of tasks and then this tragedy. If you don't, with intention, look for the meaning in your day, even if it's just one moment where you did something meaningful, you're going to burn out, right? It's not sustainable. You have to fill your cup up, and it takes intention. And often that intention and that reward comes in the smallest gesture. It's either a kind word that somebody says to you or an acknowledgement someone says to you, or it's something that you did that you can see had an impact on another person going through something. It's why we all went into medicine, right? I mean, yes, we got good grades, but why we chose this. When I decided to go to medical school, my dad, who's a neonatologist, 92 years old, and his certificate from the American Board of Pediatrics. There are more than 10,000. Anyway, he told me, Harris, you are choosing a way of life. You are not choosing. And that's true. And I'm going to digress for just a second to say that does not mean that you have to sign over everything in your life, your personal life, and so on and so forth. What it means is also not that you need to build walls that say, I only work from 7 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or whatever it may be, because that is also a false idol. What you want is to thrive in both domains, right? It is not to say that I only have to work 40 hours a week, I hate every minute that I'm there, But I have work-life balance. That is not work-life balance. Work-life balance is when you are thriving in each domain. Be true to yourself, set yourself up for success, and then follow that path that allows you to thrive in your work and thrive in your. They're not at war with each other. They need to be in tune with each other. Okay, that's my old man. I'm old enough to be all your dads, so I'm saying it. So what are the keys to success in focusing on patient experience within an organization and staff experience and everybody's experience? It's leadership. If you ask me at the end of this talk, what are the organizations that do this well? I will tell you. And the reason that I know and the reason that I find that they do well is because it starts at the very top of their organization. They set it, their CEO sets it as a priority, and everybody responds to that. And the metrics are attuned to it, and it becomes the culture. And then it just becomes who you are, right? So it's about leadership, setting the priorities, allocating the resources, which also means money. It's about measurement. It's about visibility, right? The patient experience scores, our staff engagement scores are not just something over on the side that a few people look at. Our staff engagement scores are a key determinant of where we're going to commit our resources in, because that begets everything else that happens in this org. Hospitals were created so that patients, so that clinicians, therapists, doctors, nurses, so on and so forth, could take care of patients. Not so that administrators could administrate, not so that, systems could be systems, so on and so forth. All of that, all of what happens on our campuses is so that you can take care of the next kid. That's what we need to keep our focus. And then the culture, be very clear about what your ideals are and what your vision is, and make sure that it's shared. And then your actions, trust each other. Hospital leadership needs to trust that we as physicians do this work and are experts in this work and know what it is that needs to happen in order for this to be effective treatment and experience for our patients. We in turn have to trust our hospital administration that they have important considerations that they have to be attuned to, and we should work together. We should not be in conflict. We need to be empowered to do what is right. Trust people to do the right thing. At Disney, and this is not to say all hospitals should be like Disney, but at Disney, they have one tenet in their guidelines, their behavioral guidelines, and that is it is okay to be off task if you are on mission. It is not okay to be off mission but I don't know. It is okay to be off task, whatever your task is. If you're sweeping, but you see something that needs to happen in order to fulfill your organizational mission, go for it. Right? At the Ritz-Carlton, if you work in building and engineering and maintenance on the grounds, you can spend $250 to do something for a patient, for a client, without having to ask for. The point is not that we should strive to be these hotels. The point is that when you have clarity around what your values are and what your mission is and what it looks like, and then you empower people to do it, everybody, right? When you maintain control and over micromanage and so on and so forth, people feel constrained and they don't lean into what it is that motivates them. Empower people, celebrate them, celebrate the nurses and the MAs that you work with, celebrate your colleagues who've had a tough night on call, celebrate what it is that we do so that you help to fill your cup and others' cup. And then your mindset has to be one of curiosity. Always curious as to what is it that I am missing in a conflictual situation? Or what is it that this family is telling me that they keep saying the same thing over and over again? What am I missing? Curiosity is the solution. And then listen with an empathy. So you all at Phoenix Children's are well situated to do this work, right? You have the leadership. I know Jared. Jared's the first person who ever reached out to about what is it that's happening on the national level and what can my organization learn? You have the right mission, right, to advance hope, healing, and the best healthcare for children and their families. That's awesome. Right? It's simple and clear. And then your vision is for who you're going to be, and then the values, and your values align perfectly with the idea that it's about. Right? about our teams and it's and it's about. And then you have Andrea, who is sitting back over there in the corner and who has created this curriculum, I'm sure in partnership with a lot of people in your organization. It's very clear if you go through this We Care service standards that the people in the organization are required to do as they join. You have the vision, you have the language, the culture is there, the expectations, all of it. The difference, I hope, is that now you look at it as not as some performative, right? Not as something that would be nice, but it is something that will transform everything in the value equation. And for your organization, lean into this stuff. This is for you, not to your act. Right? This is so that when you're my age, that you can look back on a career that had meaning. And not that it wasn't hard and you didn't have tough times, but it had meaning. Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I do.
The question is Q&A. The event on the slide that was so the QR code. So this is I was thinking of almost the same question, but I'll read it here. So one of our hospitals, much of the adverse experiences of clinicians act affected target by patients. So many clinicians do all we can to see actual patient family. What are some suggested that remain adversarial, primarily due to the patient?
That's a great question. And I wish I could say that I never encounter that in my work, especially as a medical director for experience at the hospital. So here's what I've learned along the way. I'm not going to tell you like, hey, it's not a difficult patient. It's a patient going through a difficult time. I'm not going to tell you that, hey, it's not a difficult family. It's a family going through a difficult time. You all know that, right? You understand that. It's easy to sometimes lose sort of track of that. But what I would say is that my advice in those types of conversations is to stay focused not on sort of knocking away all the different things that they're complaining or arguing about or so on and so forth, but is to stay focused on what it is that we're trying to do collectively for the child. And I always bring that back. I say to families all the time, look, I know you're upset and I get it. And a lot, and your experience and what you perceive is genuine, right? And don't say but. And what we want is what's best for your child. And I want it. And everybody who comes on this campus every day wants it. And so how can we turn our attention to doing what's best for Johnny or for Mary or for whatever, and really try to avoid getting caught in the challenging conversation, the complaint, the so on and so forth. I mean, I could talk on this forever because this is what I do all day, every day. And I see it go well and I see it not go well. And what I would say is often, most times, you're not going to convince a family in the moment to change their mind. They're not going to have an aha moment and say, so you just stay above the line. You just continue to focus on, and when they say X, Y, or Z, you can say, I'm sorry that was your perception, or I regret that you had that experience. Let's go back to talking about what we're going to do to move forward. Let the conversations that are going to happen around, a grievance or even a medical liability, let your hospital team that does that kind of stuff do those kinds of conversations. But for you, just stay focused on in the moment what it is that you're trying to do for that child. Don't try to change the family. This is 100% what one of those moments where it is not what they are doing or saying or how they are acting. It is how you respond. And if you get caught up in it, and even after you leave the room, if you get caught up in this sort of self-talk or the team talk of like, oh, they're whatever, you're not doing what's best for their child. I see it in my ICU where a family is viewed as very challenging, and they are very challenging. And I could tell you a funny story. And And the nurses, what happens? They start to avoid that patient's room, right? That's not what's in the best interest of the child, but that's the reality of the interactions. Don't let it consume you or consume your team in that way. It takes intention and discipline and focus on what your purpose is. Not an easy thing to answer in 1 minute, but yeah.
Do you want to announce to everybody else?
Yeah. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's makes a difference for families and for patients and hopefully for you.
Thank you so much.
Hey. Oh my God, that's you.
Wait, what, 20 years?
How are you, buddy?
Wearing your
Ann was one of our fellows.
Oh my God.
Yeah, absolutely. Was that you that was back there?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't even like process it.
That's a
Yeah,
trap.
it's a trap is right. How are you, buddy?
Yeah, doing
I
great,
hear
doing great.
really, really.
Yeah, well, you
I mean, I
know,
understand some of the
local
local dynamics, but yeah.
Yeah.
How's life?
Very good. You know, been here, it's just year 13. Moved along and building. I mean, it was a very different culture, and moving that needle has really taken the 13 years, partnering with the admin and whatnot. But I think we're in a